The role of Bible in defining public policy has been so controversial recently. I think because of the ascendancy of the evangelicals and their movement into the political sphere with a particular way of understanding how the Bible is to be interpreted and a very direct way of applying it to public policy issues. So that in some ways the issue of public theology has been thrust upon us in the particular form it takes today. But the reality is that the question of how the Bible applies to public matters of public issue is as old as the church and older. It goes back into Old Testament times as well. Jesus' ministry was public. Jesus' ministry was absolutely public. He didn't go into a room someplace and write 4 Gospels or a series of Gospels and publish them for the church. He did things. He participated in the public life. He brought himself into disrepute with public officials of his time, and he's crucified by the Roman government. So that Jesus' own ministry is in some ways the source of our public theology. For me, beyond that, even that's the core of it, that Jesus addressed public issues and participated in the life of his community. But beyond that, in the Old Testament, the form in which the revelation of God comes to us is the life of a people. It's the life of Israel. And God's promises are actualized in the life of that community. They're realized within the life of that community. God acts within that community continuously. And so that inherently, our faith makes the connection between what we believe and what we do, how we interact. I always point to the 10 Commandments. There are 2 tablets. We think of them as 2 tablets. One of them affects our relationship to God. Don't have any other gods, don't make any graven images. But the other tablet affects the way that we relate to one another. And because they both come from God, they're both equally important to God. How we relate to one another is within the grace of God, of interest to God. God could have ignored it, said, you do with each other what you want, but make sure you bring me my offerings. But God instead on the 10 Commandments says, I care about how you treat each other and how the community relates to one another. And immediately, again, at the very core of our faith is this connection between how we treat one another and how we relate to God, how we stand related to God. So I think that if our school now is adopted, the seminary is now adopted consciously an emphasis on public theology. And the biblical component is a large part of that, to try to define how the Bible helps us to live out our vocations as Christians within the broader community of which we are a part. I think the immediate past history that I was talking about earlier, with the rise of the evangelicals and their way that they have used Scripture to address some contemporary issues, hot button issues, has in some ways made the whole process for us more difficult. In some ways, we don't want to be seen as using those same methods. Basically proof texting, finding a passage in Scripture and saying, this tells us that we have to take this position on this complicated social issue, contemporary social issue. Homosexuality, abortion, the hot button issues that we've been drawn into. I think those of us who are not of that tradition are somewhat leery of that, and yet the question becomes, can we articulate a different way of using the Bible, of understanding the Bible, that doesn't just make us silent in public discussion? And I think we're going to be working on that here. The Lutheran Church, to its immense credit, I think is working on that right now in the Book of Faith project. That is an emphasis for the next couple years. I think that's a tremendous initiative to try to make people more biblically literate. The wonderful thing about the Book of Faith is it's not focused on proof texts and on justifying certain positions. It's saying basically what we have to do first is just become familiar with the Bible again and know what's in there and make it our world. My way of phrasing it would be, we have to understand that the biblical world is our world. It's the world that we live in. And if you're not familiar with it, you don't know the nature of the world that you live in. And so that initiative, the Book of Faith initiative, is to make us all familiar with the world that we actually live in. A world that's marked by grace, that's just suffused by God's grace, for instance. Who knew that we lived in that world if we didn't have with the Bible? Where our obligations to one another are also mutually our obligations to God. We get that from the Bible, and you need to know the whole sweep of the Bible, the many voices that are in the Bible, in order to have a full understanding of our world. And then with that full understanding of the world, then you can address specific issues that confront us in a much more rich, varied, and I hesitate to say sophisticated, but it's true, sophisticated way than the kind of the proof text, here's the passage, and that's the answer and that's it.